man didn't look like a thief, but maybe his striped jumper was in the wash. Mr. Silton was certain he'd stolen the van though, so I watched for a moment.
But then I heard Mr. Silton climbing up.
I was going to speak, but Mr. Silton held a finger up to his lips. He looked incredibly serious for a moment. One swift movement, and we were inside. Mr. Silton whispered that I was to go one way while he went another. "Why are you whispering?" I asked him. "Where are we going?" "Find the keys to my van, Robocop," said Mr. Silton through gritted teeth. Mr. Silton said we should split up, so I thought it best to go the other way. The piles of junk were all wired into the lanes. I suppose it was a good deterrent against thieves. Alice would have felt at home here, with all the huge piles of junk everywhere. I didn't know which key I should take, so I took all of them.
successfully managed to collect all of the keys.
As soon as I heard the gunshot, I knew I needed to go back and find Mr. Silton. The old man was pointing an even older gun right at Mr. Silton's face. But the man looked terrified when he saw me. I can still picture his hand shaking as he reloaded his ancient firearm.
"This wasn't the plan," shouted Mr. Silton.
"It's him or me. Let him have it." I didn't know what I was going to do when I caught the old man. But I knew I had to stop him. If someone dared hurt my friends, they would have to pay. I kept turning the events over in my mind. Could I have handled things differently? Could I save Mr. Silton without hurting that man? Mr. Preston could see I was upset, and said music was a good alternative to facing up to problems. "Come with me," he insisted. "I'm going to teach you how to play drums." "First," he said, "just play the bass drum along with me. We'll see how good your timing is. Play the beat." Mr. Preston asked, "Were you happy with that, or would you like to try again?" "Give each drum a few hits to get a feel for them," continued Mr. Preston. "Watch me play the notes as they hit the dock, like this. Now you try." Mr. Preston asked, "Were you happy with that, or would you like to try again?" Mr. Silton was patched up, but still pretty angry. He referred to the man as a word that wasn't in my dictionary file. It should have been between cunning and cup. I reminded Mr. Silton about going to find the others now we had the ban, but he said there was something even more important we had to do first. Mr. Silton explained that it was a good idea that Mr. Logan be released from prison early, and that this wouldn't involve a parole board, but might involve dynamite. Straight away I was apprehensive. I thought only bad people went to prison. I knew Mr. Logan was the guitarist in Mr. Silton's band, but why would we help a bad person? In the end, I think it's only Mrs. Silton's smile that convinced me to help. Mrs. Silton promised to have a present for us when we got back. She said she'd been saving her money from her decorating job. I didn't know what I would need money for, but then realized, if nothing else, new games consoles must be out. "Be careful," said Mrs. Silton with a big smile. "Don't rob any post offices, and don't get shot." In the dead of night, it was surprisingly easy to get close to the prison building. Mr. Silton said it was like the Death Star and had a weakness we could exploit, although I seem to remember the robot getting shot when they did that in the film. But there was no time to worry as Mr. Silton pressed a walkie-talkie into my hand and said, "Good luck." It was obvious the security lights would set off an alarm. I needed to find somewhere to hide, or the guards would kill me. According to Mr. Silton, this was the switch that would open the laser door to Mr. Logan's cell block. Mr. Silton seemed to think this would open the cell block door. Luckily, he was right. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Logan's cell was locked, but, thanks to my speedy brain, I was able to hack it in seconds. Mr. Logan was not pleased to see me. No one ever was, but I couldn't work out why. However, when I mentioned Mr. Silton, he soon cheered up. We quickly made our way outside. Although I wasn't sure about Mr. Logan's stealth techniques, they were quite different from mine. But someone must have noticed Mr. Logan was missing, as, with a bright flash, we were soon attacked. This still wasn't the plan, said Mr. Silton as he insisted he was okay, and that, no, I didn't need to clean up the trail of blood. He did, however, urge me to take care of the huge tank bearing down on us. We all piled into the van. Mr. Logan and Mr. Preston took out large guns as Mr. Silton gave me some driving software. It basically explained that one foot pump made the van go, and the other one signaled Mr. Logan and Preston to fire their guns. bullets fired led to non-fatal wounds, but statistically that was incredibly unlikely. Strangely, I felt too excited and relieved to care. Mr. Silton winced as he clutched his bleeding shoulder and explained how you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. I think broken eggs meant dead people. Sometimes, he said, you have to do whatever it takes to survive, even if that means killing.
But not innocent people,
said Mr. Logan as he stared straight ahead. Eventually, I asked Mr. Logan what he had done to end up in prison, but he just continued staring out of the window. Mr. Preston smiled as he said, I suppose someone should explain. He told me when the war started, he and Mr. Silton had avoided conscription, but Mr. Logan was called up. His unit's first orders were to sweep through a huge urban area, killing anything that moved. The only trouble was, hundreds of refugees had recently taken shelter there. The generals knew that those people were there, said Mr. Preston, but they couldn't have cared less.
This isn't the time for another one of your conspiracy theories,
interrupted Mr. Silton. Although this obviously annoyed Mr. Preston, he continued explaining how Mr. Logan and another man deserted, and, after a poor attempt to hide in a wooden vaulting horse, the pair of them were caught at gunpoint on a train, whilst trying to speak rudimentary German. Mr. Logan guided us down a small side street as Mr. Preston complained that he needed the toilet. Mr. Silton asked why we were taking the scenic route while he was trying not to bleed to death. But Mr. Logan gave Mr. Silton a quick glance. You're fine, he said with the faintest of smiles. Soon the night sky was full of twinkling stars, and I was able to impress everyone with my navigation skills. The software was state-of-the-art, but I remember Heather telling me how the ancients had used the stars in much the same way. It always made me smile, thinking about the names she gave the constellations. It was the middle of the night by the time we got back, but Mrs. Silton was still up waiting for us. Really, again, in the same place, was all she said as she shook her head and tended to Mr. Silton's second bullet wound. Mr. Preston nearly knocked us over as he sprinted towards the bathroom. It appeared that his body had kept on making urine, even though it didn't have anywhere left to store it. I asked Mr. Silton about Heather and the old lady, but he said he was just about to wash his hair. When I asked him again later, he said the main thing was that we'd got Logan and the van back, and couldn't the rest wait until I had cleaned up the band room for him. I didn't know what to say. Everything we had done, everything I had helped him with, I thought it was all to get everyone back together. But now I didn't know what to think. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Silton explained that it was okay if I only travelled on trains and was alone. I must have looked worried as Mrs. Silton smiled and continued, if you really want these idiots to go with you, they can disguise themselves and catch the next train after you. Mr. Silton was dismissive, and said I'd get nowhere without proper ID. They'll be stopping robots for even the tiniest of things, he said. And a robot passport costs a fortune these days. Well, said Mrs. Silton, it's a good job I've got this. Mr. Silton looked confused and asked where Mrs. Silton got the money. Sometimes, said Mrs. Silton, when God slams a door in your face and shoots you twice in the shoulder, he opens a window. Mrs. Silton explained how Preston had given her the extra money. He said there was good money to be made selling pills and powder to people that distracted them from the world being an absolute mess.
Bedtime,
said Mr. Logan as he carried his guitar into his room. Everyone else left one by one, leaving me stroking the dog. woke to the sound of Mrs. Silton making herself some breakfast. It felt very early, but I suppose it was just that we had got in so late. Mrs. Silton gulped down her coffee, and with a reassuring smile she said, "Let's do this." The pedestrian tunnel was far longer than I expected, but it was nice. It gave me a chance to chat with Mrs. Silton. She told me she was from an upper-class family and that her parents had nearly disowned her when she married Mr. Silton. But she said she really was happy being with her husband. And after all, as she put it, he did provide for her in this messed-up world. However, I couldn't help but laugh when she said how much she liked Mr. Silton's band. I steered the conversation onto the topic of the war. She explained she had been a nurse near some major combat, but she looked really sad, so I changed the subject. I asked her if the town was nice. Mrs. Silton smiled, and described it as a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Train tickets cost $1,000, so Mrs. Silton said I should trade in some of the things I'd cleaned so I could afford to travel. However, when we tried the door, it was apparent that the junkyard owner wouldn't be back for a while. So Mrs. Silton suggested I try to earn some money by other means. She said there were plenty of jobs in the town that a robot could do. The largest of the old ladies explained the job to me. I would be drying plates. She explained that old people couldn't afford to retire anymore, so she and her friends had to take menial jobs. All of the old ladies would be throwing plates at me as quickly as they could. I just had to catch and dry them. old door led into some kind of drinking establishment. But the bartender soon made it clear that, as he put it, they didn't serve my kind here, and that I would have to wait outside. Suddenly, as if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared. "Hello, sir," he said. "If there's something that catches your eye, just pick it up and bring it over to me." The foreman explained the job to me. I would be making bricks. The world needed rebuilding and these bricks would more than help. He said I would be on the end of the production line and would be shaping the final part of the bricks. All I had to do was hit the brick in time with everyone else.
post lady explained the job to me.
I would be sorting parcels. Many people were now separated by desolate battlefields and needed these care packages to survive. The parcels were either red or blue. I just had to stamp the right ones with the right color at the right time.
The train is now departing. Maiden, this is Maiden. Mind the doors. Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
The clouds were gathering as we pulled into Factoryton and the Professor's factory.
Factoryton, this is fact.
Cold specks of rain began to fall as I stepped off the train onto the deserted platform. The station looked as if it hadn't been used in years. There were no conductors, no ticket barriers, not even an up-to-date timetable. The place was like a ghost town.
Factoryton.
the security system jumped to life. I knew the only way I could deactivate it was to destroy its power source. That's when I spotted a perfect shiny surface. Maybe I could deflect one of the lasers toward the generator. Mr. Silton and the others arrived and changed out of their disguises. Although Mr. Preston was moaning as apparently Mrs. Silton had only washed his and Mr. Logan's Halloween costumes.
The office was deserted, but it looked like people had left in a hurry. Various computers had been left on. Strangely, there were drawings of me everywhere. I hoped the professor could tell me why when we found him. were no signs of life. If the professor was living here, he hadn't been here in a long time. This all looked very familiar. I would have looked around more, but we needed to find the professor. It was strange. None of the machines were totally active, but the power was still on.
A large piece of machinery blocked our path. Mr. Silton smiled when I asked what we should do next. I knew straight away that he didn't mean Mr. Preston or Mr. Logan when he said, "Someone's gonna have to climb inside."
It seemed we could use the computer to move chunks of the machine around. I knew I needed to make a clear path, as it would be me that would be going through it.
As we entered the extravagant corridor, the most beautiful tune played in the distance. But almost as soon as we began to enjoy its dulcet tones, the music stopped, dead. The professor was dead, but everything seemed wrong. He was old, very old, maybe 20 years older than when I'd last seen him. Mr. Silton sounded very sad when he said, "How did anyone even get in here? I don't know what to do now. I suppose we'll head back to the train station."
It was hard to believe the professor was gone. Although he was always suspicious of me, I was sad to think I'd never see him again.
"Is it?" "Yes, it is."
"This is the right day,"
said the professor as he jabbed at a small metal box.
"I don't know how much time I've got to explain," he continued as a bright light began to surround everyone.
"Oh, not long at all." We had reappeared just as smoothly as we had left, but we were somewhere very different. Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan were speechless, but the professor just continued studying his box. Looking back, I suppose I was rather stupid, as I ended up chasing a beautiful butterfly. I was lost, but soon I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought.
I couldn't believe we had time traveled, but there was no time to sightsee.
Now, this was clearly worth something.
The prehistoric world looked like paradise, except for the killer cavemen.
Some things were worthless junk, but this could be sold for a decent price.
I would have liked to have a look around, but I have to get back to the others.
After literally 10 minutes of Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan saying "whoa" and "dude," the professor began to explain time travel. If I can find the correct point in time, then I should be able to, well, make things better. I suppose it's like we're in that excellent movie, chuckled Mr. Logan. Back to the Future? Replied Mr. Preston. No, that excellent movie. Back to the Future 2? Time Bandits? Time Cop? Terminator? Groundhog Day? Groundhog Day? Groundhog Day. The box let out a loud bleep as the professor gave it a heavy thump. This damn thing's so dependent on the maths used to calculate where the Earth is at any one point in time and space, that it's almost random where we'll end up, or even how long the time window will stay open. That last one was the shortest I've had yet. Although obviously apprehensive of our situation, I think Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan were too excited to really pay attention. But they were far less excited when I asked what his longest stay was, and the professor replied, about 15 years. I was stranded in ancient Egypt for so long. They had me build them a steam-powered robot. You should have seen the things they had it build. Yes, wonderful things. It was like I was Thoth incarnate, or the modern Prometheus. Speaking of which, robot, have a look around, see if you can find anything to make a fire. As great as my shoes were, they weren't much use when there was nothing for them to stick to. I rolled deep into the cave, but at least I had found the professor some firewood. Now I just needed to get back to everybody else. It may seem ridiculous, but I really did fall this far into the cave. Things started to look familiar. I was pretty sure I was nearly back where I had originally fallen. Everybody warmed themselves by the fire. In the orangey glow, the cave even looked a little homely. Mr. Logan was much more comfortable now that he could see his surroundings, but Mr. Preston kept saying, "We're in bloody dinosaur times." The professor laughed. He pointed out that there was 65 million years between dinosaurs and the emergence of man. But that just made Mr. Preston panic about possible dinosaur ghosts. I got the feeling Mr. Logan had heard this kind of talk before, as he sighed when he said, "Oh, I suppose you believe in ghosts as well now, do you?" "Well, yeah," said Mr. Preston. "Barry's missus says this bloke who works with her uncle reckons his brother saw one. Fact." And with that, he began to tell the most amazing story I had ever heard. He explained how there was a man traveling through the Black Wall Tunnel who saw a young motorcyclist stood by a smashed-up motorbike. The man stopped, so the motorcyclist told him an address, but when he got in the back of the car, he fell silent, clearly in shock. "This isn't a ghost story," interrupted Mr. Logan. "This is called giving someone a lift." Mr. Preston was annoyed. Mr. Logan's stupid joke had ruined his train of thought. The brother of a bloke who works with Mrs. Silton's uncle gave a young motorcyclist a lift after a crash outside the Black Wall Tunnel. I said, just happy to be part of the conversation. "Yeah, that's it. said Mr. Preston as he explained that when the man arrived at the address, the motorcyclist had vanished. He said the man, not knowing what else to do, knocked on the door of the house. Soon an old lady answered, and when the man asked her if she had a son, she burst out crying and sobbed, "I did have, but he died 10 years ago today, just outside the Black Wall Tunnel." I couldn't believe my audio sensors. This was concrete proof of the afterlife. I mean, Mr. Logan did point out that the story was from a children's TV show called Grange Hill, but you can't argue with the facts. Soon, the professor had finished inputting whatever data his box needed. "Robot," he said, "we need to be outside for my computations to be truly accurate. Find us an exit from this platonic allegory. The cave. Find us a way out."
This block looked perfect, so I decided I would only place it where the professor said I should.
Well, I've reversed the polarity of the neutron flow, so here we go, said the professor as the glowing light surrounded us again. This is it, said the professor as he looked around. Oh no, he gasped as his expression became far more serious. It's the wrong time.
We had appeared in another barren desert. I was beginning to think that the past was made of nothing but sand. The professor looked concerned as he examined his box. It was then that we realized we were completely surrounded. The men seemed to think I was some kind of god, or, as it turned out, some kind of sacrifice. The stalactite above me looked quite unstable, like it was ready to come down.
This was one of the most valuable things I'd seen.
As I got to the top of the cliff, I could see everyone else being led away in heavy chains. Their extravagantly dressed capturers were only moving them in a slow march, so I followed them at a safe distance. Strangely, the men seemed to ask the professor something, who nodded in agreement. Although they clearly knew each other, the man in charge pushed the professor into a small wooden cage, along with Preston and Logan. The men then left. I was about to attempt to free my friends when one of the men returned with some tools. It was then I heard some machinery start in the distance, and the man left again. I then found out what the machinery was.
Mr. Preston took a chance to do something I'm guessing he thought was brave, shouting, "Catch you later, you ancient Egyptian dickweeds." "This looks right,"
Stay here,
whispered the professor, just in case. "Sorry to take you on a less than excellent adventure," whispered the professor, his voice slowly weakening, "but I knew you needed to see these things. I was always worried about the military possibilities, but I'm pleased to see your consciousness software is still growing. Life is a state of mind." I had no idea what he meant, but he looked so happy.
"Quick!" shouted Mr. Logan. "Hide!"
I jumped into a large cupboard with Mr. Preston, who whispered something about seeing some people on the security monitor. The cupboard door was pretty thick, so I couldn't really hear what was going on, but suddenly I heard Mr. Silton shout, "Run!" When Mr. Preston eventually opened the door, we saw a large glowing light, exactly like the one from the professor's time machine. It was only then that I realized that we had reappeared just before we had left. As we walked back to the train station, Mr. Silton was truly confused. All he kept saying was, "What the bloody hell happened?"
Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
The train made its way to Sitcombe. I could get off here to find Alice.
Sitcombe, this is Sitcombe. Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
It looked like I would need a ticket to get through the fairground's automatic doors.
"Now then," said the dirty old man, "let's see what you've got. Can never have too many of these. Impressive."
That's a body dazzler.
"I've already got a buyer lined up for this. Can't say fairer than that. That's a beauty. This looks interesting.
Everything else is junk."
"Go on then," said the younger man. "Stick everything in, Bertha."
Television not included, sir. That cost 2,000.
The fitting room was actually a robot upgrade facility. Once completed, the money was digitally taken from my passport account.
additional shield orb slot. Very useful. That will be 50,000. Looking to speed up the cleanup? Great choice, sir. That will be 3,000. The binocular vision upgrade will allow you to carefully examine your surroundings. It retails for 15,000. No refunds on that one, sir. That costs 5,000. Clean even the largest junk in the blink of an eye. Great choice, sir. That costs 30,000. I was surprised to find Alice's house was a lot larger on the inside, and strangely, it lacked any color. Curiously, this was a ridiculous amount of stairs for such a small cottage. How strange everything was. I remembered wondering if I had been changed in the night. Inside was a beautiful brightly colored field, but there was no way I could fit through such a tiny door. On the table was a large cake. I'd never eaten anything before, but for some reason I felt compelled to have a taste. Suddenly, a large glass bottle appeared. I don't know if it was all the growing that I had been doing, but I felt like I needed a drink.
look who I found at the train station, said a distant voice. For some reason they were all dressed as wizards. Oh my God, shouted the voice.
Stop!
Alice explained what was going on, while the man swiftly put my head back together. And this is Simeon, said Alice. The man insisted I called him Sim, and apologized for attempting to hack my CPU.
Alice laughed and said, sorry,
Sim tends to sneeze whenever he's stressed or nervous. I was worried you were like other robots. I'm glad you're okay though. I've had mixed results in the past. This is Betty, said Sim, and this idiot is Fluffers. It's like they're our children, said Alice, although it's strange, it was them that sort of found us. And even before Sim had reprogrammed them, they were kind of nice to me. Betty even tried to clean up some of my rubbish. So, said Mr. Silton, the reason we're visiting is our little robot friend wants to see Heather and her mum again. Plus he tells me that there's some sort of problem with escaped nanobots in the old house. Alice looked puzzled. What do you need me for then? She said. I'm assuming you've not broken the habit of a lifetime and thrown away Sim's security pass. Sim smirked at Alice. It'll be here somewhere. Mr. Silton smiled. Excellent, he said. Then I presume you've still got that video camera you stole when you were working on Richard and Judy. Sim guided us down a set of basement stairs. Well, thanks to Alice's quirky hobby, he sighed as he flicked the light on. We've still got everything. Mr. Silton smiled. Then, he said, I think I've got a plan.
Although I would have loved to have stayed in Alice's picturesque town, it was time to get back on the train and continue my quest.
Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
Mr. Deck's TV studio was deep inside the bombed-out buildings of Big City.
Big City, this is Big City. Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
Once I'd made my way out of the station, Mr. Silton and the others jogged up alongside me. As soon as they got the chance, they ducked into an alleyway to change their clothes. Mr. Silton was the first to change. Deck's studio's down that way, he said, in that huge posh building, the British Corporation of Truth. The Corporation of Lies and Propaganda, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, said Mr. Preston. And dancing competitions, said Mr. Silton. There are some benches at the other end of the road. We'll wait there till the crew leave, then sneak in through one of the loading bays. While we walked, I asked how Mr. Deck had ended up back on television. Celebrities weren't very keen on walking down the red carpet at awards ceremonies with bombs falling from the skies, explained Mr. Silton. But they still craved attention and validation, so the solution was to host one big awards show in a giant underground bunker at Burlington. You can't broadcast from deep underground. So they had to run cables to the transmitter through a vent on the surface. A bomb-sized vent, as it turned out. It took a great shot. 1 in a million. The lack of survivors meant Z-listers like Deck were now the A-list by default. Just then, Mr. Logan interrupted, saying it was time to move. Robots are allowed pretty much anywhere in the building as long as they look the part, whispered Mr. Silton. You just need to be wearing no clothes and have the blankest of faces. I didn't really like the sound of that, but I realized that it was the only way I'd be able to get in. So I took off my suit and made my face blank. Blanker, said Mr. Silton. Blanker with an ER, said Mr. Silton again. Well, I suppose that'll have to do. Deck's dressing room is in some lavish suite, said Mr. Silton as Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan lowered me into the empty corridor below. Have a look around, whispered Mr. Silton, and we'll catch up with you in a bit. didn't know how much this was worth, but it looked expensive.
As I approached the group of people, a man in a white lab coat was demonstrating what he called the future of robotics. He said that anyone interested would be able to see it in action on one of the sound stages later today. "It's much better than these old models," he said as he stared at me. "My new version does exactly what you tell it to."
This seemed quite valuable. No wonder people wanted to be on television so much. TV studios were full of video games. This was clearly worth something. Some things were worthless. It's junk, but this could be sold for a decent price. As soon as I entered Mr. Deck's dressing room, he shouted, "Get out!" I said, "I don't want to be disturbed." I was so shocked that I couldn't keep my blank face. Mr. Deck looked confused. "It's you, isn't it? Get away from me, you yellow bastard," he said as he reached for a huge red alarm button, but he was interrupted by Mr. Silton falling from a vent in the ceiling. "All right, Deck," smirked Mr. Silton. "Hello, Barry. And it's Mr. Deck if you don't mind," replied Mr. Deck as he hammered on the alarm button. "Quick," said Mr. Silton as he turned to me, "find a way to stop that alarm."
There were 4 alarms left to turn off. There were 3 alarms left. There were 2 alarms left. there was one alarm left. I had completely turned off the alarm.
A serious-looking security guard walked into the garden set, so I quickly approached him. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I had to keep him out of Mr. Deck's dressing room. I attempted to resume the blank face that Mr. Silton had shown me as I announced that Mr. Deck was not to be disturbed. For some reason I said it in an unusually high-pitched voice, which didn't seem helpful. The security guard's eyes narrowed. Now in a full panic, for some reason I decided this was a good moment to do the finger guns for the first time. The large man shoved me out of the way, but quick as a flash Mr. Logan had appeared and snapped his neck. "Sorry, had to be done," was all he said before running back toward Mr. Deck's room. "I didn't know you shredded the axe," said Mr. Logan as he placed an acoustic guitar into an ornate sarcophagus. "I don't," said Mr. Deck. "I got it for Elton John to sign." For once, everyone else looked as confused as I did. "We'll take this wine, and this portable TV," said Mr. Preston as he packed the coffin with as many expensive things he could find. "These bathrobes are pretty fancy as well." "Put those down," said Mr. Deck. "Elton John gave me those." "What's with you and Elton bloody John?" asked Mr. Silton, but Mr. Deck just looked angry. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "There's easier ways to get good wine and cheese. You can't just burst in here and take my stuff." A large smile crept across Mr. Silton's face as he said, "Oh, it's not just your stuff we're taking." "You try to take me anywhere," said Mr. Deck, "and I'll scream this place down. I know people in high places. I'll have you executed, and that little yellow bastard dismantled. My father is the head of the BCT. But Mr. Silton's smile widened as he pulled out a bag full of familiar-looking mushrooms. "Robot, take the sarcophagus this way back to the loading bay," said Mr. Silton. "We'll climb back through the vents and meet you there." Mr. Silton was worried that the studio set was quiet. In fact, he worried that it was, as he put it, too quiet. So, as per usual, it was me that went first. Once away from the studio, we were able to duck down a few dark alleyways. "I think we're safe," said Mr. Silton. "You get dressed and head back to the train now. We'll wait here and travel back later with our cargo." Soon we were all gathered around the dusty blackboard back at Mr. Silton's house. He was explaining what was an increasingly complicated plan. "And that, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "is the plan of the century." Sim explained that Heather and her mum were in Lab 33. He said I should find them, then take them to the gate on the other side of the base. I nodded, even though I must have looked terrified. "I'll need to register these two," he continued. "Hopefully the guards won't notice I walked in with 3 robots and now only have 2. He wished me luck and reminded me it was Lab 33, but you only need to tell a robot something once.